Hello. This short talk is being made in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a matter of fact, it's being made in my study at home because we are isolated in this pandemic. What can music speak to us about in this situation? Well, it could speak especially of hope or of fear. And when we think of fear, we might very readily think of death. Uh, I will be speaking about death today, but certainly another time I'd like to speak about hope to provide some balance there. If we think of Schubert's time, this talk is going to be based on Schubert's music. At his time, there were plagues, of course, as well, especially including typhoid fever, for example. And so death was very much in people's consciousness at that time. And the lifespan was short and infant mortality was high. Well, I'm going to be speaking about the song Wiegenlied, or lullaby, or cradle song. The Deutsch catalogue number of Schubert's works is 498, and the year of composition was 1816. Well, what can that possibly have to do with death, you might ask? And I don't blame you if you ask that, because it's been understood as just a nice lullaby for the whole, really, of the 200 years since it was composed. But let's have a look into it, because we might possibly find something else in it. Now, when you're going to look into a song, the best way to start is to study the text of that song. Now, the poet in this case is unknown, but we'll have a look in a moment at the German original and a free translation, which I have written just to provide the meaning in a straightforward manner, not intending it to be poetical or artistic at all. But that will be enough to get us started. And then we will come back to the poem again after we've had a look at the music too. When you're looking at that poem on the screen there, you can pause, of course, however long you like, to become familiar with the poem. Here's the text then, and we should look at all three verses, not just the first verse, although I suspect that's what people in the past have often done. So I'll read this through with you, starting at the beginning, of course. Sleep, fair sweet boy, your mother's hand is gently rocking you. This cradling waistband is bringing you tender peace and sympathetic comfort with its swaying. Well, after the first verse, you might say, what a nice lullaby. And again, as I mentioned before, I don't blame you if that's what you thought. And the music suggests it too, as we will hear shortly. But let's continue reading then with the second verse. Sleep in your welcoming grave. Your mother's arms will still protect you. She will look after all your desires and all your belongings lovingly, all of them with the warmth of love. Sleep in the velvet fold. The sound of love will still be heard around you. A lily and a rose will be your reward once you are asleep. As I say, we will come back to the poem after we've heard the music, but first of all, we will look at the score. When musicologists look at a score, they're inclined to be a bit analytical. I think you'll excuse that, though, because it's just an attempt to allow us to understand the music better. This setting is strophic. That's to say, all three verses are set to the same music, but all the verses cannot suit the same music equally well, so one verse must have been set primarily, while the other verses may be just slightly less closely matched to the music. We can try to see which verse was set primarily. Usually it's the first verse, and that's what it seems to be here. We can say that because, for instance, the ornament on milde suits that word rather than the words at the same place in the other verses. But there's not much difference in the suitability of the three text verses to the music in this song. Let's look briefly at the melody. It is arranged in parallel phrases. It has a lilt like the lilt of Viennese speech, in my opinion. The relation between speech and music has often been studied. In speech, the units of pitch and duration are free, but in music they're fixed, and that's what turns the speech of real life into an art form. For instance, the turn on Süße is rather like the way you'd say it. Süße. Not exactly like the way you'd say it, but a musical rendition of that way. That one example will be enough here, but this area could be treated at greater length in another talk. The notation has 10 bars of 4/4 meter, but it's effectively 20 bars of 2/4 meter. The conducting motions that you can imagine for this music would have 2 strong beats in each notated bar. So in this case, the notation uses what can be called large bars or double-sized bars. We should look also at the form of the song. It is incipient 3-part song form. That's to use the term of Percy Goetz, who was an early theorist. Part 1 is a period covering the notated bars 1 to 4. Part 2 is a phrase covering bars 5 to 6. Now, if part 3 consisted of a complete recurrence of part 1, the form would be called a complete 3-part song form. But here, the third part has only one phrase, bars 7 to 8, so the form is called incipient 3-part song form. Then follows a postlude phrase in bars 9 to 10. So we've taken a look at the form, which is a standard one, and it is easy to follow. The accompaniment paints a picture and conveys an atmosphere here with the back and forth rocking or cradling of the child. The rocking figure is set aside in part 2 of the song, that's to say bars 5 and 6, while the mother is just thinking, but it is present everywhere else. Now the most important part of my talk has arrived. The score contains a specific clue as to the real meaning of the song, something that forces the listener to think of death. Can you see it or can you hear it mentally? If you wish, you could pause the video while you see whether you can find it. The answer is that the clue lies in the postlude, which we haven't discussed yet. In fact, I haven't found any commentator on this song who has paid any attention to the postlude. But please let me know if I've missed one. I'd welcome that. We should notice the open 12ths at the start of each of the 4 bars, rather the 4 half bars, the low A flat and the high E flat. They represent the hollow sound of funeral bells, which will lead us to an understanding of the real meaning of the song. Those funeral bells were not present in the song up to that point. Schubert has added them here as a commentary on the poetic situation. And by the way, this is an example of Schubert's conciseness. People often speak of his heavenly length, but conciseness very often arises in the preludes and postludes of his songs. The music makes a succinct commentary. Now then, let's listen to a recording. Ideally, we would listen to the whole song, but out of respect for copyright, I'll only provide a short excerpt from the beginning, and then a short pause, and then another short excerpt. But I hope you will listen to the whole song which you can easily find on YouTube at no cost. The performers' names will be given in the references at the end of this video. And those same comments will apply also to the other audio examples which will follow shortly. We can find other examples in Schubert songs of such funeral bell sounds. They're also called passing bells in the sense that someone was passing away. A clear example is das Zügenglöcklein, which means the passing bell. And the Deutsch number is 871, and we will have here the start of the score and also the start of a recording of it. Another example is des Baches Wiegenlied, the Brook's Lullaby, which is the last song from Die schöne Müllerin, Deutsch number 795, and the 20th song in that cycle. The bells in these songs are not just bells in general, but funeral bells in particular. And the distinction is, of course, important to us here. I'd be glad to hear of any other examples of funeral bells that are represented in either Schubert's vocal music or conceivably even his instrumental music, although we have already seen enough examples for the present purpose. In the light of what we have by now discovered about the Wiegenlied, we may go back and take another look at the poem. We could certainly look again at the word grave in verse 2. Other commentators have taken this, it seems, as a metaphor for the child's bed, shying away from taking it literally, but we now see that it should be taken literally. Wishes and belongings. Other translators have taken these as the mother's wishes and belongings rather than the boy's. In the last verse, velvety fold. In the light of what we've seen, this must be the lining of the coffin. Lily and rose. These have been taken by others as suitable rewards for the boy when he wakes up in the morning, rather than as the flowers customarily thrown on the coffin at the time of burial. That is still sometimes done today. The lily represents purity and the rose represents love. Finally, the word sleep. This has been understood in the everyday sense rather than as a euphemism or metaphor for death. So the first word of the song and of each verse has unfortunately been misunderstood. But I think we have now come to a better understanding of the poem and of the music. I hope then that this short presentation has shown a way in which music can speak of death, here, fortunately, in a consoling way. Naturally, I also hope that we ourselves may be spared the worst of the present threat from COVID-19. Thank you.